All right, we've got a case here, a really chilling story coming out of Orange County, California. It's been making headlines, and we're going to take a deep dive into this one. We've got news articles and legal documents, even a psychological profile. So let's jump into this brutal double murder.
Yeah, you know what strikes me right away is how a seemingly normal debt situation can spiral into violence like this. It's a reminder that we need to pay attention to those underlying motives, those things that drive people to these extremes.
Right, it's a good point. So let's set the scene. We've got a 30-year-old man from Glendale, Huangting Gong, and he's accused of murdering a couple from Brea, Kwanlun Wang, and Jing Li, both 37 years old. It looks like it all boils down to a debt, $80,000, that Gong owed to Wang.
And it's not just a simple dispute over money. What's really disturbing is the level of planning and just the cruelty involved.
Yeah.
It seems like that debt was just the beginning, the trigger for a series of events that unfolded in a very calculated way.
So let's talk about the alleged deception. One of the news articles mentions that Gong told Wang's family they were all going to New York for a business deal, and he was finally going to pay back that 80 grand. It sounds like he was setting up an alibi.
Exactly, a very clever fabrication to buy himself some time and throw off any suspicion. But as we know, that lie unraveled. And this is where the family's attention to detail becomes super important. You included a report about how a family member, they were suspicious, so they contacted the authorities when things just weren't adding up.
And that was a key moment, wasn't it? That one act of reporting their concerns really helped to uncover these horrible events that happened next. It's such a crucial reminder that if something feels wrong, especially when someone's missing, you got to trust your gut and speak up.
Absolutely. They knew about the debt, and they didn't hesitate to act on their suspicions. It really emphasizes the power of community involvement in solving crimes. Sometimes even small details, like seeing a suspicious person on a security camera, can be the key to breaking a case wide open.
It's a scary thought what might have happened if they hadn't done that. So according to these sources, there were two separate attacks, both very calculated and very brutal. Wang was allegedly shot in the head out in the desert, and then Gong allegedly turned his attention to Li, attacking her with a hammer in their home. He even forced her to give him her phone password before taking her to another desert location in San Bernardino County and shooting her.
It's hard to even imagine the brutality of it all. And the fact that he allegedly drove around with Wang's body and the victim's own Tesla, it paints a very disturbing picture of his state of mind.
You know, that psychological profile you gave me suggests that this meticulous planning could point to a very specific personality type, one that compartmentalizes their actions, separating them from any emotion. It's chilling, but understanding this could help us see warning signs in other situations. It does feel like something out of a nightmare, but unfortunately, this is all too real, and it doesn't stop there. Gong then allegedly tried to cover up what he'd done, setting both bodies on fire in those separate desert locations. And then he burned the cars too, including Wang's Tesla.
The extent he went to hide these crimes is almost as shocking as the murders themselves. Driving from place to place, burning the bodies in the vehicles, it points to a high level of planning and detachment. But it also makes you think about his fear of being caught, this desperation to separate himself from the horror of what he's accused of doing.
Then there's the robbery. He goes back to the couple's house and steals almost $250,000 worth of luxury goods, watches, handbags, everything. We were talking earlier about how this case shows what can happen when financial pressure and violence collide, but this robbery adds another layer to that.
It does. At first glance, it just seems like he was after a quick payday, especially considering that initial debt. But one of the articles you shared suggests something else, too. Stealing those luxury items maybe was a way for him to project an image of success, even though he was drowning in debt. It's a disturbing possibility, the need to keep up appearances, even after committing such horrific acts.
It's like he's trying to create a new reality, one where he's not a murderer, but just a guy who somehow ended up with all this expensive stuff. And then, think about this, Gong was eventually caught at LAX. He was coming back from Seattle, acting like nothing had happened.
That's where the psychological detachment comes in again. The brutality of the crimes versus this very normal act coming back from a trip. It's jarring. But it's not uncommon in individuals who can compartmentalize their actions to this degree. It's a glimpse into how complex the human mind can be. It really does make you think, that level of detachment, how a person can even do that. But shifting gears a little, the police work in this case, the way they put this whole puzzle together, that's fascinating to me.
It is impressive how quickly they acted. Seems like law enforcement was all over it as soon as that family member raised the alarm. Makes you wonder, though, if Gong hadn't been so obvious, driving around with a body and all that, would it have taken longer? Would they have caught him at all?
It's an interesting question. It really highlights how important it is to have good police work and an aware public. The family's observations, their willingness to report their concerns, even when they might have seemed small, that was crucial. It really shows how much we all need to be involved to keep our communities safe.
You're absolutely right. They noticed those little things that could have been missed, but in this situation, those tiny details ended up being really important clues. It's a powerful reminder that we can all play a part.
Exactly. This case shows how important it is to listen to the people closest to the situation. They understand the victim's routines, habits, their relationships. That kind of information can be invaluable for investigators. It's information they might miss otherwise.
Now, let's talk about the stolen goods for a minute. Almost $250,000 in luxury items. Was it all about profit, or could there be something more going on psychologically?
That's where things get really interesting. On the surface, it looks like a classic case of a criminal trying to make a quick buck. But if we look deeper, like Dr. Smith, the expert you mentioned suggests, maybe it was a way to distance himself from the victims, to try and erase any connection he had to them.
So more than just stealing for profit, maybe he was trying to get rid of evidence or even create a false narrative.
Yeah, exactly. By taking those things, he wasn't just stealing. Maybe he was trying to get rid of evidence, trying to create this new reality where he's not the murderer, but just some guy who happens to have all these fancy things. It speaks to a level of denial that you sometimes see in these cases.
Okay, so we have all this evidence, looks like a pretty strong case. What's next for Gong? One of the documents mentions something about special circumstances enhancements to the charges. What does that mean for him?
It basically means the prosecution thinks these crimes were especially bad, and that could have a big impact on his sentence. We're talking 2 counts of murder, kidnapping, arson, burglary, serious charges, especially considering the alleged planning and brutality. Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer, he has a big decision coming up, whether to pursue the death penalty.
That's a huge decision to make, and one that will definitely get people talking. What do they have to think about when making a choice like that?
It's a complicated process. They look at everything. How bad were the crimes, how it affected the victims' families, any past criminal history, how strong the evidence is. They also think about things like the defendant's mental state at the time, any history of trauma. There are no easy answers.
Sounds like a tough job, trying to balance justice for the victims while taking everything into account.
It is, and in the end, it's up to the DA to figure out what punishment best serves justice in this case. It's a big responsibility.
What if they decide not to go for the death penalty? What other options are there?
Well, then he's probably looking at life in prison without parole. Still a very serious sentence, in line with the crimes he's accused of.
It's hard to understand how someone could do something like this. What kind of person would commit these acts? Can we even predict this kind of violence?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's something criminologists and psychologists have been trying to figure out forever. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, no perfect profile that fits every violent criminal.
But there must be some common factors, right? Some things that might increase the risk of this kind of behavior.
There are, of course, things like past violence, substance abuse, mental health problems, exposure to trauma, especially early in life. But we have to remember, these are just risk factors. Lots of people with these issues never hurt anyone.
So it's this combination of nature and nurture, their personal situation, the choices they make, and outside influences.
Exactly. And each case is unique, a product of all these different factors. It shows how complicated it is to really understand human behavior, especially in extreme cases.
It's a lot to think about. And it makes me think about the families of the victims. What kind of help is there for them? This must be incredibly difficult for them.
Fortunately, there are organizations that focus on helping families cope after tragedies like this. Victim advocacy groups provide emotional support, guidance on legal issues, and help with practical things. It's a lifeline for them during a time of unimaginable grief.
It's good to know there are people out there who dedicate themselves to helping these families pick up the pieces.
They're absolutely essential. These organizations help them heal, advocate for their needs, and make sure they have the support they need to move forward.
You know, in one of those articles, DA Spitzer used the word depravity to describe these crimes. It's a strong word, but I think it fits when you consider the level of cruelty and planning we've talked about.
I agree. It really captures the disregard for human life that's evident here, the cold and calculated nature of it all. A stark reminder that darkness can exist in the most unexpected places.
And it shows how important it is to seek justice, not just for the victims, but for everyone.
Absolutely. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about defending our values, protecting the innocent, and preventing future violence. It's sending a message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated.
This has been a tough topic. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else we should be thinking about in this case? Anything we might have missed?
Yeah, there's a lot more to come out as the case moves forward. But we've definitely hit on the major points. The brutality, the planning, that unsettling lack of emotion. It's really disturbing how this whole thing connects to bigger societal issues.
Hmm.
Debt, financial pressure, this desire for luxury, and how far some people will go to keep up appearances.
It is a dark reflection on our society. This pressure to look successful, to have it all, even when you're struggling, that can be really tough on people. And sometimes, like we see here, it can lead to devastating consequences. Makes you wonder if there were signs, things in Gong's past that could have hinted at this kind of violence.
Yeah, that's the tough part. Looking back, it's easy to connect the dots, but predicting violence is almost impossible.
Hindsight's always 20/20, right?
Exactly. There might be little things, behaviors or past events that raise red flags, but catching them in real time is really hard. It's a challenge for everyone: law enforcement, mental health professionals, even families and friends.
So, what can we learn from this? What can we do to protect ourselves and the people we care about from becoming victims? Can we stop this kind of darkness from taking hold?
That's the question everyone wants answered. And it's tough. There's no easy fix, no guarantees. But awareness is a big part of it. Paying attention to what's going on around us, trusting our gut, being careful with money, especially large amounts, those are all important steps.
One thing that stood out to me in the investigative report was how important technology was. The security cameras at the victim's home, that footage was critical in identifying Gong.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is a double-edged sword, but in this case, it was definitely a huge help. Security footage, phone records, GPS, all of that helps investigators piece together a timeline and back up what witnesses say.
It just goes to show that even with all the technology in the world, good old-fashioned detective work is still essential.
I couldn't agree more. Technology can help, but it's those human skills, intuition, critical thinking, connecting the dots, that's often what solves a case.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I have to admit I'm still a bit shaken. To think that someone capable of this level of calculated cruelty could be living a normal life, blending in, it's a disturbing thought.
It's natural to feel that way. Cases like this force us to look at the dark side of human nature, the potential for violence that we all have. But it's important to remember that these extreme cases are not the norm.
That's true. But they do remind us how important it is to be aware, to be kind, and to make sure that people are held responsible for their actions.
I agree. And maybe by understanding what leads to these tragedies, by talking about them openly, we can work towards a safer and more just world.
I hope so. I'd like to leave everyone with something to think about. As you go about your day, consider this. What can we do, each of us and together, to create a culture of empathy, responsibility, and accountability? How can we prevent this kind of darkness from taking root in our communities, our families, even within ourselves?
It's a tough question, no doubt, but a really important one. Because if we want a better future, we all need to be a part of creating it.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay curious.